Hey everybody, welcome to a brand new episode of Tomb of Terrors. I'm your host, Old Man Brad. Whether you are new to the show or returning for another episode, thank you so much for giving me a listen. If you love the show, drop me a review over in your favorite podcast app or become a patron, patreon.com/oldmanbrad. Also, don't forget to follow me on Letterboxd so you can see all the sometimes questionable watches that I do. Just look for Old Man Brad over on Letterboxd. All right, this episode I have a first for the show. We don't have a movie this week. We have a book. I will be talking to the author of Horror in Haddonfield, The Untold Stories of Halloween, Andrew Grevas. We're going to kind of talk about how he came up with this idea for the book, what kind of went through preparing the book, and all that fun stuff. I can't wait for you to hear my chat with Andrew. Before we dive into that, if you're in the Cincinnati area, come out to Frightful Fridays on the third Friday of the month. So thankful to be partnered with the Esquire Theater to host a horror screening. Our screening for September, on September 19th, will be the original The Evil Dead from 1981. This is a 4K restoration that we're going to be showing up on the screen. I think it's going to look fantastic. Cannot wait. This is a movie I've never seen on the big screen, so I am excited to be able to see it up on the big screen for the first time. But come out September 19th, 10 p.m., and let's watch a movie together. All right, let's dive into Horror in Haddonfield. I don't have a trailer to play to kind of cut us in. I don't have any of that stuff. This is a book that you can get on Amazon now, and it's out in various other places. A book where Andrew went through and collected many interviews, kind of behind the scenes stories through the Halloween franchise, which spans 13 total movies right now. Some of the people that will be interviewed in this book: Danielle Harris, Scout Taylor Compton, Tom Atkins, Dee Wallace, Dwight Little, Paul Brad Logan, and so many others. But let's dive into my chat with Andrew, and I will talk to you on the other side. The Halloween franchise has spawned almost 50 years with 13 movies and multiple timelines. Have you ever wanted to try to make sense of these timelines and the stories behind them, or get those never before heard behind the scenes stories? The new book, Horror in Haddonfield, Halloween's Untold Stories, will give you just that. I want to welcome in my very own Dr. Loomis to give us all the information. Author of the book, Andrew Grevas. How are you doing today, Andrew?
I'm great. That was an excellent introduction. I don't think I could have done it any better myself.
So what inspired you to write Horror in Haddonfield?
That's a fun one. A buddy of mine is a publisher, and for years I've written for websites, and he was teasing me. He's like, when are you going to write a book? He's like, you've been writing for all these different websites for years and years and years. He's like, it's time to take the plunge. And I was kicking around the idea, and I had a few ideas, and I was talking to my wife, and I was like, it has to be something that I'm really passionate about, my first book. Like, it's got to be something that I really want to do. And I rattled off 3 ideas to her, and without hesitation, she's like, do the Halloween one. And I started like, okay, well, maybe I should do this. And Halloween Ends was set to come out like 2 days later. So it was that week is when all these conversations were happening. And I was like, if I like Halloween Ends, or if there's enough to say, I'll do it. And I watched it, and I was one of like 3 people that liked it the first day.
You can make that 4.
4. Okay, perfect. The reactions were so polarizing, but I watched it in my living room. I was one of the people that streamed it on Peacock, and I was like, this is great. And my mind was going, and I had all these ideas, and I started coming up with more ideas, and I started really thinking about how Halloween has spanned generations at this point. Like you said, people who are streaming this film on Peacock opening night, perhaps their grandparents in 1978 were at a drive-in seeing this film. So it's kind of, Halloween is like this connective tissue between the generations, parents, grandparents, and children. There's 3 or 4 generations of people who have followed this franchise, and maybe they haven't seen all 13 films, but they've seen 1 or 2. And that's something that I found to be pretty cool. And this weird time where there's so much content right now, and there's 1,000 different streaming services and apps. Halloween is this weird connection point amongst generations, and my mind started going from there.
As you were thinking of a book idea, how did Halloween land on that kind of short list of, you know what, let's do a possible book about this now 13 movie franchise?
It was a big part of my like personal like gateway to horror, just as a kid. One of the acknowledgments in the book is my cousin Jeff. He's deceased, but when we were kids, we watched a VHS copy of Halloween in his basement. And I think we were 7 or 8 years old, and it was like, whoa. It was just one of those early cinematic experiences where you're like, we probably shouldn't be watching this. Our parents would probably be mad at us for watching this, but we can't take our eyes off the TV. And those early experiences in my life that made me realize that I was drawn to film, and I was also drawn to being scared. And it's kind of this opening to the rest of my life in a sense.
You decided, all right, I'm going to do this. Now, take us through a little bit about trying to set this up, because you interview countless people through, all the eras of the franchise and tell many stories through all those eras. How did you come up with or try to figure out who to talk to, who might say yes? I don't know how many people you tried and they were like, no, I don't want to tell my story.
A lot.
How did it go kind of getting started with that?
It's tough because at first, like, I had a different idea of what I thought the book would be. I thought it would be less interview heavy and more writing heavy at first. And I was like, okay. And I kind of told myself, if I could get one interview per film, that would be perfect. And then I can write around it. So I always had this idea of 13, but I realized quickly that it was going to be harder than I thought to get a lot of these interviews, and a lot of not necessarily no's, but the even more dreaded no response, where you reach out, you send that email or you send a message and you just never hear anything back.
Yeah, it's just crickets.
And it's so devastating, but the longer you're in this process, the more you know to expect that. For every 100 people you reach out to, you might get 10 that say something back. And that's just the way the game goes. But a friend of mine said, hey, I actually know Stacy Nelkin pretty well. And she's like, I could just send her a text and see if she wants to be in your book. And I was like, perfect. And that was the first interview. So I consider that day one of work on the book was the day that I sat down and talked to Stacy. From there, I just started pushing harder because I loved that conversation. I had such a great time talking to her. Her stories really motivated me. And I was like, I'm going all out. Anybody that I can get for this book, I'll take it. And that was kind of became my approach. And I started working around the interviews after that. It was like the interviews are more important than perhaps I initially thought. Like, it's their stories that can shape this book. And that's kind of the fun part about writing a book is the ideas are changing on the fly, just as you're getting into the work. And Stacy's stories really were an inspiration for me to kind of change my original plans.
And after you talked to her and it kind of just energized you, you said you just pushed harder. How did you manage getting, the responses and other people to agree to come on after that?
A lot of it was a snowball effect.
Okay.
I'll use Dwight Little as an example. He was one of my first interviews. And when I spoke to him, we hit it off, both Ohio guys, like we just had things in common. We had a good banter back and forth. And at the end, he's like, this was a lot of fun. He's like, let me know who else from Halloween 4 responds to you. And I wasn't having a whole lot of luck. So a few months later, I reached out to him and I was like, hey, I've tried everybody else from your film, but I haven't got any takers. And he's like, let me send out an email. And next thing you know, Alan McElroy and Daniel Harris both reached out and said, hey, we'd love to be a part of your book. And it was kind of this cool thing where I was like, okay, Dwight got me these 2 interviews. And then I'm on the phone with Danielle Harris conducting that interview. and we hit it off. Again, same thing as Dwight. We're having this great conversation. We're laughing. We're talking about being parents. It's all this other stuff that's not even Halloween related, just building this rapport. And she's like, "Do you want me to text Scout and see if she'll be a part of your book?" And I was like, "Yes, please." And that's how that happened. So some of it, I want to call it good luck, but it was also like, I didn't just get on the phone and ask my 10 questions and get off. Like, it's that old school journalism mentality of build a relationship. And there was a lot of that, and that really worked in my favor.
With that, were there any of those conversations as you were kind of not only just building a rapport with them, but getting the stories that actually surprised you?
There were definitely some surprises. And I don't know how deep we want to get into like the actual.
Yeah, I don't know how much you want to give away because we want people to go pick up the book and read it themselves, right?
Thank you. There are some surprises in there. A few people, like, on an emotional level, surprised me. I think the Scout interview is a great example of it. Got a little heavier than I anticipated, and I was just sitting there afterwards, like, we did something really cool here. Dan Ferens, who wrote Halloween 6, Curse of Michael Myers, I think a lot of people have heard his story, but I think we go into a little bit more detail here, and some of his responses did surprise me. But really, to go back to Halloween Ends, the writer of that film, Paul Brad Logan, I think his answers might surprise people, perhaps who didn't have the greatest opinion of that film. I really want them to read his interview because I think some of his answers are going to make people look at that film a little bit differently.
Just like you and I, we grew up in that time. We saw Halloween at younger age, probably younger than we probably should have.
Yes.
How when you got to this book, how did you balance not only as a fan, getting like, oh crap, I got to talk to Danielle Harris and others. How did you balance that coming in as a fan, but still trying that critical voice of I'm trying to write a story for fans to get their stories out there?
I mean, you kind of just said it for me. That's how I presented myself to a lot of these people. Like, yes, I am a professional, but I'm a huge fan of your work. And I think that was a cool icebreaker because I wasn't a stuffy journalist, but I also wasn't a fanboy either. I was somewhere in the middle. And that's absolutely how I tried to present myself to all these people. And little like icebreakers and personal connections go a long way because to go back to Danielle, my youngest son has this habit of coming into the room when I'm watching a horror film. And it gets to the point where, the youngest gets away with anything in any given family. It's always the baby that gets what they want. So often he'll just sit in the room and like, just watch the movie with me and I'll tell you when to close your eyes. And he watched part of Halloween 5 with me. And he told me, he's like, "Dad, I'm really jealous of that little girl." I'm like, "Why?" And he's like, "I want to be an actor." He's like, "Look how much fun she's having." And I told Danielle that, and she started cracking up. And it was like this moment where like she could see my fandom. I knew her film really well, but I was also like relating to it as a parent, which she could relate to. And I don't know, things like that I think go a long way when you're conducting these interviews because you're coming across as a fan, but a fan who definitely appreciates what you're talking about.
I think it makes that conversation more human, not just a transaction back and forth.
Definitely.
I think with that, when you have that human relationship, I think you get the deeper story that maybe, just a regular old news reporter wouldn't get.
That's what I was going for. I wanted, like, once I realized that interviews were going to be like the crux of this book, and I kind of moved some of my other ideas out of the way, and I laughed because maybe those ideas will come up down the road and something else, but the interviews took over. I wanted this book to be more personal, and I wanted it to be about the people who populated this fictional town, their stories. And some of their stories are angry. Marianne Hagen from Curse of Michael Myers, she goes on some rants that are a little bit legendary in the book. She's got a lot to say, to where I had to throw in a disclaimer or two. And then there's other stories that are sadder at times. There's other stories that are more funny, and it's kind of that full range of human emotion.
Once you finally really dug into the book, how long was it for you to conduct the interviews for the book? How long have you been working on your book, I guess I should say?
It was basically 2 years to the day
with
editing, and there were some stop and starts in there just with day jobs and family life. Sometimes you get busier with the other things, and I didn't get to work for a few nights, and then I would cram all weekend long, and having a day job and a wife and kids and a house, it gets busy, and sleep was definitely the thing that was sacrificed during these 2 years.
And as you were editing, getting to finding a publisher, was there any hurdles you had to jump? Because you're talking about a horror franchise and actors in this franchise of, whether it's Dimension or Blumhouse or any of those people that you kind of had to weave your way through.
I was very fortunate to be pulled aside by some people from our community, the horror writers, the horror podcasters, people who've been doing this longer than me. And they gave me a lot of good tips and tricks around the legal landmines that Halloween offers. So I felt very fortunate to be kind of put on the right path early on with what to avoid and how to steer clear of any potential trouble. And I was told stories of other people who had difficulties with these companies that you mentioned. So I feel very grateful that people took the time to kind of put me on the right track and help me avoid these potential problems.
I mean, that's good, because then you're just like, crap, now I have this whole book. Now what do I do?
What do I do? Even having Halloween with an apostrophe S in the title was part of that. Horror in Haddonfield, Halloween's.
Okay. Yeah, you weren't specifically the movie. It's the season.
That was strategic to avoid these particular problems. So things like that.
Not everybody who has been part of the franchise is with us anymore. And one question I do want to ask you: if you could have interviewed Donald Pleasance, what's something you would have asked him?
I would have been very curious to know the differences between the shoots. And I think I would have really tried to just dive into how was 1 different than 2 and 4, 5, and 6 different. And he knew these films better than anybody. He could have, he was the historian of these films because he was the constant. Besides Mustafa Akkad, he was the other constant.
Yeah.
But Donald Pleasance really could have told you how things changed. What was the same? What was different? How were ideas and concepts constantly taking new forms and new shapes? I would have loved to have talked to him about those things. Really, Deborah Hill, too. Something that comes up in the book is that she was a little bit more involved with some of these other films than perhaps people realize. There's a good story about her involvement with Halloween 5. I'll just mention it. So I think people will be interested to hear that.
Deborah Hill is one of those original people from the beginning. So yeah,
I went out of my way to try to capture as many Deborah Hill stories as I could, to the point where it almost felt like I was shoehorning him in a little bit, but it was one of my goals. She's kind of this unsung hero in the early part of the franchise, so I went out of my way to get Deborah Hill stories, and I hope that comes across. I hope that people pick up on that, but it was a goal of mine, was to kind of give her flowers, so to speak.
This kind of goes along with it, as you're talking stories of her, and you said originally it wasn't, you didn't think about doing it as an interview book. What, now that it's all done, it's edited, it's getting out there in the world, what would you say the overall voice of this book is?
I like to say that it's the voices of the people who populated Haddonfield.
Okay.
It's their stories. And the first chapter is a lot about Haddonfield as a place, as a location, and the strengths and characteristics of that town. And then I go into the stories of the people who filled that town. That, like I said, that was not always the intention, but sometimes these happy accidents come along where you realize, hey, that first idea was good, but this second idea is much better. And I'm glad that I kind of felt comfortable enough to change course when a better idea came along.
And besides, obviously, the original, what's your personal favorite in the franchise?
I am a huge Season of the Witch fan.
Okay.
I am just a sucker for that film. But 2 and 4 are kind of my other favorites. I love Halloween Ends. That's probably in my top 5 at this point, which is a surprising answer for many.
So not Busta Rhymes Halloween?
If I were to do my power rankings, I do think that would be last. But
I think it would last on most people's list.
But I do have 2 great interviews from that film. Brad Loree, man, that is one of the best interviews. He played Michael in Resurrection. That is one of my favorite interviews in the whole book, just because he's talking to me about the particulars of stunt work. And like I was talking about earlier, all these interviews are different. Everybody's has a different tone. Some are happy, some are emotional, some are dramatic. Brad's and Chris Durand as well, who played Michael Myers in H2O, they get very into the art of filmmaking and kind of talking about like the particulars of stunt work and how things were done. It added this whole other layer to the book. It felt like the special features on a DVD from the early 2000s.
If you could write your own sequel, which timeline would you jump in?
That's a good question. The obvious answer would be to continue like the Season of the Witch, like anthology motif.
I wish we could have seen that go on, but
I don't know. I think the other 2 fun possibilities would have been a third Rob Zombie film. It was written. They got very close to making it. Patrick Lussier goes into great detail in the book about that script, but also picking up from ends. What do you do after you've effectively written Laurie Strode out of the story and you've killed off Michael Myers? How does the story move forward? As a fan, I am kind of curious to see the possibilities there.
Andrew, I mean, we probably could sit here and probably talk for multiple hours to go through Halloween. Horrors of Haddonfield, your book, stories, the behind the scenes stories through Halloween, is out there. People can start to get it now, correct?
Correct.
So now the book is out there. People are starting to read it. Where can people follow you? I'll put links in the description of the episode of where they can go find the book. But where can they follow along to you and the future for Horrors in Haddonfield and after?
I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Blue Sky, all at Andrew Grevas on all 3. I pretty much post the same things on all 3 platforms. So if you follow me on one, I suppose you don't really have to follow me on the others. But I am on those 3. And then the book also has its own social media accounts on those 3 platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Blue Sky, at Horror in Haddonfield on all 3.
And I will put all the links in the episode so people can follow along. And I know we've been trying to get together to talk your book here for a while, and I'm glad we finally got to connect. I wish you all the best with the book, and I hope people really resonate with it.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on, and I'm glad we did get to finally connect.
I want to thank Andrew so much again for chatting with me. It was great this was a discussion that we'd been trying to set up for a while. It was great to finally be able to sit down and talk about this book. At first I was like, you know what? This is a horror podcast. Why can't I do books? It doesn't just have to be movies. So that's kind of how this came about. He reached out to me and said, hey, he's also in Cincinnati. And I was like, let's do it. Let's talk. Let's talk about this book. I have not read through the book yet. I just got a copy of it. Just got my copy from Amazon this week. So I'm excited to dive into some of these interviews. I'm really excited to hear just the stories behind some of these movies, kind of how they came to be, if there are any background stories that maybe I've never heard, from interviews or any of that kind of thing. But looking forward to checking this out. I'll have a link in the description for you to go pick up your own copy of Horror in Haddonfield, so you can also read through these interviews with all these people involved in the Halloween franchise. And, I don't have a double feature because it wasn't a movie, but I'm going to say, obviously, go watch some of these Halloween movies. Let me know what some of your favorites are. As you heard in the interview, I myself am a fan of Halloween Ends. I know it is a very, very, very divisive movie in the franchise, but there was something about that movie that just worked for me. I know it didn't. The trilogy as a whole, throwing this new character Corey in that last movie, Corey should have kind of been in Kills, but the progression of the town of Haddonfield through that trilogy, it totally worked for me. So yeah, go watch yourself a Halloween movie. Go pick up Andrew's book, Horror in Haddonfield. Go read it. And before I head out, bring home the all-new Naked Gun on digital. See Liam Neeson like never before as Frank Drebin Jr., as he leads Police Squad in this outrageous comedy, also starring the iconic Pamela Anderson. By the film critics, they're calling one of the funniest movies of the decade, and get nearly an hour of gut-busting extras, including deleted scenes, outtakes, and more. It's available all your digital retailers from Paramount Pictures. I have a couple digital codes for this film. Hit me up, oldmanbradpodcast@gmail.com. First come, first serve. Let me know if you want one, and I'll shoot you over a digital code for the film if I have any left. But yeah, go check out Naked Gun, the new Naked Gun. If you've seen it, let me know what you thought of it. Well, that will do it for this episode of Tomb of Terrors. Hope you enjoyed my interview with Andrew Grevas. I will be back soon with a brand new episode. Just snuggle up in that blanket, turn off the lights, because it's okay to be scared. We'll talk to you later, everybody.